Okay. Well, with that, we'll introduce our speaker for this evening, Miles Lewis, otherwise known as Smiles Lewis, because his name is Stephen Miles Lewis. If I could read this in the low light here. Miles is an audio production administrator for the Texas State Library Talking Book Program, and he's been there a lot of years, right? A lot of years. He is also the founding president of the Scientific Anomaly Institute, aka Anomaly Archives, and that library is, of course, at the Nerve Center, the INACS Nerve Center, and it's a lending library, so I'm sure he'll talk maybe about that a little bit more. He's vice president and trustee of the Institute for Neuroscience and Consciousness Studies, that is INACS. And let's see here. A past video, section director for the Travis and William County chapters of Mutual UFO Network. Miles is, he said he's a member of the INACS board and vice president. With that, I'm sure Miles will give you some more information about his vast and anomalous background. Miles.
All right, thank you for coming. So thank you for coming out tonight. Hopefully some of you have seen the video or heard the audio or were here last time 2 years ago when we did part one of this lecture. And it's been a long time coming. I've had a lifelong interest in this subject, and it's led me to collect thousands of books on the subjects of UFOs, consciousness, and related phenomenon. I had a number of early life experiences with minimal, not too dramatic, typical synchronicities, distant empathy, and some lucid and precognitive dreams. Don alluded to my work with Austin MUFON for several years, leading the group there, as well as the Austin Abductee Support Group. And all of this led me to publish, the ELF Infested Spaces Journal of Possible Paradigms from 94 to 2001, and that's where you can find a lot of my information online at elphis.net. The website for the Anomaly Archives is anomalyarchives.org, and we have, as I mentioned, thousands of books on consciousness, UFOs, and other anomalous subjects. I've also been the editor of a local paranormal-oriented newspaper, the Austin Para-Times, which was founded in the wake of September 11th. And shortly after leaving that, in 2003, founded the Anomaly Archives, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that thankfully has a presence in the INACS Mind Quarters. I've also been streaming for over 12 years an internet radio station that deals with a lot of these subjects of paranormal and parapolitical topics, and I've hosted a number of web radio shows. Now, in that first lecture, which was about 2 hours long, and we didn't quite get all the way through the presentation that I had prepared, but we covered a wide range of subjects. I talked about the different dangers associated with the UFO phenomenon, both from a physical perspective in terms of the electromagnetic aspects. There's even a FEMA firefighter's guide that some of you may not know about that warned about getting too close to a UFO. But there are also psychological issues at play with the phenomena that are worth noting as potential dangers. Now, I say that I'll balance it with my firm belief that there are a lot of psychological benefits from the subject. In fact, I think that the very nature at its core of the UFO phenomena is that it expands our awareness of reality and the nature of space-time. And it causes us to ask really important questions about the nature of reality. We also discussed the perspective of these UFOs as a teaching mechanism, both in terms of the phenomenon itself, perhaps teasing us with our own potential, as well as the opportunity that it presents to use the UFO as a way of teaching people about strange phenomena, about science, and about asking questions and teasing out riddles. We also talked about the physical versus psychological versus the psychical approaches. There are plenty of physical effects that the phenomena manifests that can be investigated. There are a number of psychological effects that can be researched. And it's the psychical aspects that I think are the most important, because I think they actually may provide a better basis for understanding the true nature of the phenomena than just studying the psychological or the physical. We also discussed the variety of materialist reductionist explanations that try to write this phenomena off as simple hallucination. Terms like fantasy-prone personality, mass hysteria, temporal lobe epilepsy are often bandied about. While I do think at least some of these terms have merit and should be used in discussing the phenomenon, they, as I say, are often, far too often, just used as a way of writing off the phenomenon as being nothing actually physical or important. My favorite UFO researcher, Jacques Vallée, will be coming back to him. We talked about Terence McKenna, psychedelics, and mind at large, Aldous Huxley's idea about a greater consciousness, Jung's idea of the collective unconscious, and the role that synchronicity and archetypes play in this phenomenon, as well as myth, imaginal reality, and that trickster element, that one particular archetype that seems to crop up so much in this phenomenon. But in this talk, we're going to just give you a brief introduction to some of my biases. We'll talk about the paracrypto-ufology aspects, the alternative theories of the UFO phenomena, and the earth lights and balls of light that seem to be an important factor in understanding this phenomena, and where this has led me in my opinions about this phenomenon, the idea of a Gaian consciousness, a planetary mind, as well as the grand deception aspects of this phenomenon that may have more to do with humans' manipulation of the phenomenon, and how so much of this has to do with the voices that people perceive from this phenomenon and related strange encounters, and the mind control element, and again going even further into the darker aspects of this phenomena, and that's the faux UFOs, the fake UFOs that I believe are being created by certain human agencies. Now, I grew up firmly believing in the classic myth of UFOs as extraterrestrial visitors, that Roswell represented a crash saucer, and that the government had the remains of the bodies and perhaps other vehicles and other bodies from other crashes, and that they probably had the truth about the phenomenon, and that it was only a matter of time before this was revealed. I grew up reading these many classic tales of encounters with the fantastic, and these are just some of the favorite aspects of the phenomena that I grew up with and have found intriguing. The contactees of the 50s and 60s, the people claiming to be in direct physical contact as well as often astral or spiritual contact with beings from elsewhere. The evolution of the phenomena from the earlier pre-modern era airship waves and to the ghost rockets and the Foo Fighters and into the contactees, and then these early close encounters with more monster-like creatures, the Flatwood Monsters of 1952, the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins of 1955 are good examples of that. But really, it was, as with most people, the accounts of abductions that seemed more believable to me growing up. While I might want to believe in benevolent space brothers, I just had a harder time swallowing that pill. But then I liked those Kelly goblins from Hopkinsville, so it's all a matter of my personal biases. And I must stress that I'm not trying to convince you that my perspective is the right perspective. That's, to me, the hallmark of somebody that you should run screaming from. I am here tonight to tell you about the many different areas of exploration that I've come across that I think point to something more interesting and more complicated than simple extraterrestrials in nuts and bolts craft that have vehicles whose tires you can kick physically. That is not to say that there are not these types of encounters happening. In fact, many of the ideas that I'm going to be talking about tonight would provide the perfect cover for such traditional extraterrestrial encounters. One of those alternatives here is the counterculture contactees. According to Brendan O'Regan, as quoted in The Stargate Conspiracy by Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince, Brendan claims that over 100 scientists in the United States alone have been contacted telepathically by such benevolent advanced beings. And among the many characters who've claimed such contact are science fiction writer Philip K. Dick, Buckminster Fuller, John C. Lilly, Jack Sarfati. And in the picture there is, on the left-hand side is Jack Sarfati, in the middle is Saul Paul Sarag, and on the right, I believe, is Fred Allen Wolfe. And Robert Anton Wilson, who's another famous counterculture writer, also claimed contact and was, in fact, in correspondence with Philip K. Dick about his experiences. So, but these contacts actually were more akin to the 50s and 60s contactees. They were more mental. They sometimes had possible physical manifestations. In the case of Jack Sarfati, he claims to have received a strange phone call. His mother apparently can corroborate that he received such a strange phone call by what he describes as an artificial intelligence sounding voice, a computer synthetic voice that seemed to have neither male or female gender, and that he would have long conversations with this voice, and this voice would tell him about things he was going to be doing in the future. I don't know what to make of that, but I find it interesting. I think it's part of the continuum of these strange encounters. Now, I'm not going to read all that, but Philip K. Dick, there's a really great video that you can see of him in 1977 at a science fiction convention where he basically expresses that these series of strange experiences that he underwent, that he worked into his various novels, Valis, Man in the High Castle, and others, Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said, and others, were his attempt to come to grips with the nature of the experience that he had had. And he really felt that instead of expressing an experiencing of past lives, that he was describing a whole different present life. One of the ideas that he suggested was encapsulated in the phrase, the empire never ended. In other words, the Roman Empire never fell. And that our sense of time having progressed since then was somehow an illusion. And in this speech, he expressed what has become very commonplace. I'm sure you've heard in the last 10 years, many mainstream news reporters talking about the idea that we are living inside of a computer simulation. And in fact, if you read this quote or listen to this interview with him, it's clear that the brothers Chow were privy to this lecture of his when they created the famous movie The Matrix and the subsequent films. This idea that we are living inside of a hologram or some kind of computer simulation. And he's really, I describe him, and others have described him as a patron saint of paranoia. But his experiences get to the heart of how do we determine what's real and what is not? What is simulation and what is reality? Most people know him through his film, the adaptation of his book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was made into the movie Blade Runner. And which dealt with the idea of, well, if you create a synthetic human that can pass as human, well, what is human? And these are some of the things that he struggled with. And as he said in this quote, which was brought to my attention by Jacques Vallée. In 1992, I saw Jacques Vallée in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he quoted Philip K. Dick saying, "I will never really know what did in fact happen. Some living, highly intelligent entity manifested itself inside me and around me, but what it was, what its purpose was, where it came from, I have tried 1,000 theories and all work equally well, but at the same time, each theory leaves some datum unexplained." And this is the problem I have with most people who claim to have an answer to the UFO phenomenon, is that they pick a theory, but it only fits part of the data. And that's also why I would say I would advocate for a multiple theory interpretation of the UFO phenomenon. I don't think there's any one explanation that accounts for all the data. I think there are a number of things going on simultaneously. Something we're not going to get too deep into tonight, but I'm sure you've all heard about David Icke's reptoids that control the planet. The phrase breakaway civilization has become increasingly popular in the last few years due to the historical research of UFO researchers like Richard Dolan, and as Mac Tonnies put it, who published the cryptoterrestrials, for too long we've called them aliens, assuming that we represent our planet's best and brightest. Maybe that's exactly what they want us to think. And I remember the first time I saw that image there on the right in the 90s, and this was an artist's conception of what a humanoid bipedal reptoid would look like if they had continued evolving and hadn't gone extinct. And I quote, and I didn't say who that quote's from. The one in the middle there, that's the interview with my friends Greg Bishop and Wes Nations when Dr. Carla Turner, an abduction researcher who's not very well known these days, she passed away suddenly and mysteriously many, many years ago. Sadly, she was really doing fine work in the UFO field. There are things that I could criticize her about, but I think she was one of the few who was trying to deal with the anomalous data. She was trying to not throw out data because it didn't fit her theory. And the gist of this quote, which comes from a sit-down interview with her here in Austin back in, I think, 94 or 95 when she was here for the annual MUFON conference, is that one night she and her husband tried to sit down and throw out all their preconceptions and try to see if there was one particular theory that fit best. And the theory that they came away with actually is very similar to that espoused by Charles Fort, the perhaps original ufologist from the 1890s, early 1900s, who posited that we are property, that he felt in the strange phenomena reports that he was collecting that there seemed to be some intelligence that had a hold of the earth and that we were just its cattle. And that's kind of the idea that she expresses here, the idea that what if there was some other species that had evolved here before us and become non-corporeal and had evolved to the point where they didn't need to be physical anymore, but perhaps they still required something from the physical plane, either us or some byproduct of us. But these are some areas that are also, I think, worth exploring. Another researcher who I don't mention here is Ivan Sanderson, who was a biologist who talked about the idea that there could be an advanced terrestrial civilization under the waves in the ocean, the largest part of our planet. And I think there's a lot of merit to that. Now, one of the elements that you see over and over again are in abduction stories particularly are the apparent control by the alleged UFO intelligence of the abductees. And there's many cases of this where abductees would have blackouts and perform sometimes complex tasks as if they were somnambulist, sleepwalking, sleep driving in some cases. And I heard this over and over from people I met who were having experiences, and it's throughout the UFO literature. And another aspect of the phenomena is the apparent hearing of voices. And it's these elements that I think have gone on throughout our history and lead me to the few facts I feel we can say unequivocally about the phenomena, which is that humanity has always considered itself to be in contact with these alien others. We've ascribed various origins to them. But those voices have caused us to do a number of things, from create religions to, in the worst cases, commit atrocities against our fellow humans and against the environment. But in the best aspect, it's sometimes manifested in us being good to each other. But there's a recurring theme here that I think is cause for alarm, and that I will get into a little more later on. Vallée has warned about this a number of times from his 1979 Messengers of Deception book, where he warned about groups like the Bow and Peep cult, which turned into the Heaven's Gate cult, which, as we all know, committed mass suicide in 1997. Several points before and after that event, he again was sounding the warning, and he continues to sound the warning, mainly just that there are far too often cults that develop around these belief systems. And I just yesterday saw this headline. I mentioned David Icke earlier. My son's David Icke obsession killed him, but I'm proud that he made his own choices. A very strangely titled article from the Mirror in the UK, where the mother is pining for the loss of her son, who apparently was attempting to achieve astral projection. The article says, expounded by David Icke, who says he is the Son of God. And apparently all the youngster was trying to do was induce hyperthermia to have an out-of-body experience. And while, I wouldn't deny any adult the right to try to do such a thing, the way he tried to do it ended up with him dying. And I think this kind of goes to the nature of our society these days is such that altered states of consciousness are not respected. There's very little opportunity for people to explore them in a satisfactory or safe way, and so we end up with tragedies like this. Anyway, that's actually a flyer. I don't know if y'all realize, but the Heaven's Gate cult, they came through Austin on their last recruitment tour, and I got to see them. They were at the Hyatt down on Town Lake, and I remember when I saw this, I did not realize it was the Bow and Peep cult that I'd read about from Vallée's Messengers of Deception, and in hearing them talk, they just seemed like any other Baptist or other religious church. They were espousing that this realm is not the most important one, and there was nothing particularly dangerous in my estimation from listening to them, but within a year, they would all be gone. And there's some other weird parapolitical links to some of the other cults, including the Heaven's Gate cult and the Order of the Solar Temple. There's a lot of weird cult stuff through esoteric groups out of France and Canada, but I'll save that for another time. And we probably won't get too deep into this, but this gets to this idea of, well, if these abductees can be controlled by some external force, what is that force's agenda? Now, many of you may not know this, but I'm the survivor of a mass shooting. I was at the Fiesta Parade in 1979 when Ira Atterbury opened fire and killed 2 people and injured several others. Now, I don't suspect any sort of mind control aspect to this. I suspect, like in many of these cases, it was simply somebody who was at wit's end and didn't get the medical and psychological help that they needed. But as early as 1979, John Keel, another writer of some repute that I really respected, had that to say. That what if there is a plan to trigger all these individuals, and would we have maniacs shooting from bell towers? But this will go into a little more. In the last lecture, I alluded to the work of Dr. Kenneth Ring, and I cannot suggest his stuff highly enough. Dr. Kenneth Ring, Professor Emeritus of Psychology at the University of Connecticut, did a phenomenal work. He was doing near-death research before he got into the field of UFOs, but somebody put Strieber's Communion in his hands, and he immediately saw the connections, and he began doing studies of people who'd had near-death experiences and UFO close encounters and alien abductions, and he found a lot of interesting parallels, and he came away with the sense that there was a shamanizing of humanity occurring, and that perhaps this was, the creation of the tipping point of 5% or less of the population having these sorts of experiences that could then lead us to some expanded consciousness. And I really, really recommend this book. It's one of the few books out there that actually has demographic data on these experiencers. And again, he's very much a believer that there's something important going on here, but he also is in the these are physicalized thought forms. I think he's 50-50 perhaps on the physical aspect of that, but these represent a transpersonal in the Stan Groffian mold of experiences that help us go beyond our current level of consciousness. Another area of interest to me is that done by various ethnologists, anthropologists. There's an anthropology professor who did her dissertation here in Austin many moons ago, Susan Lepselter, whose Poetics of the Uncanny is a fascinating read. But the quote there is from something I said back in 1995, and really my views on this subject have not changed much since 1995. Through confirmation bias, I see all the new evidence that comes before me as confirming the belief that I've held all this time. So I admit that freely, but I just said that there's no better example of UFOs as reflectors of our collective societal problems than the abductors' appearances, body abducting, hybridizing, fetus stealing, medical technicians, alienating us from community and selfhood. Indeed, there is evidence to suggest that certain themes within the UFO mythos have their origin in humanity's collective loss of self and modern feelings of medical alienation. And there have been a number of theses, dissertations done on this that deal with the idea that what we're seeing in the narratives is not so much a reflection of physical, real encounters, but that these are reflections of societal problems that are going on. A good friend of mine who's a neuroscientist, Dr. Stephen Mizrak, wrote a very controversial article back in the 90s called UFO Abductions and Race Fear. Boy, did he never heard the end of that one. And he was basically expounding upon the work you see to the right there, demons, doctors, and aliens, and exploration into the relationships among witch trial evidence, sexual medical traditions, and alien abductions, which was put out by the International Fortean Organization in 1993. Just again, these are some of the researchers that I've respected the most in my quest for trying to understand the nature of this strange thing. Jacques Vallée, John Keel, who passed away in 2009, Terence McKenna, who passed away in 2000. And boy, that picture down there on the right gets a lot of people all a Twitter because, yep, that's Howard Anton Stanton LaVey of the Church of Satan, sitting between Jacques Vallée and his French colleague Aimé Michel. Vallée, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, said that it's really important for researchers to dive in experientially and become a part of the phenomenon. In other words, to rub elbows with those cults that he was warning everybody about. Now, pretty much everybody up here has been criticized or described as a conspirator or an agent provocateur. As with all this information, don't take my word for it. Investigate these things yourselves. But a number of people have now, John Keel was mostly just criticized because I've often heard said he was not afraid to make up data. But he was a journalist, so what did you expect? But John Keel is often characterized as more of a demonologist as opposed to UFO researcher. If you've seen the movie Mothman Prophecies, it's actually one of the best adaptations of a book I've ever seen put on the screen. I've also heard his book Mothman Prophecies described as the in cold blood of the paranormal literary genre. And he had a lot of, I think, really important ideas. Vallée is still alive and kicking, but of course has rubbed elbows with a lot of military and intelligence insiders, which is probably why he's so convinced of the parapolitical nature of the manipulation of the UFO phenomenon. And I just recently, gnosticmedia.com, I think Jan Irvin, is that the guy's name? Everybody's a conspiracy agent. Aldous Huxley, Terence McKenna, they were all part of the conspiracy. Just can't get away from it. All right. And one of the websites that I write for as the Texas Bureau Chief is the League of Western Fortean Intermediatists. What the heck is an intermediatist? Well, intermediatist is one who accepts that the universe is in a perpetual state of metamorphosis such that no extreme identity can stand for very long without evolving to another extreme. In the intermediate universe, there are no eternal truths. At best, what we accept as fact is actually an ongoing transition of fact to falsehood, to fantasy, to fact, ad infinitum. In the intermediate universe, the most ironclad scientific facts of yesterday may, and usually do, topple into the trash bin of scientific naivete, while the scientific heresies of today may, and usually do, evolve into the ironclad science facts of tomorrow. That's pretty much, I think, the agnostic perspective I would advocate for. And there, of course, is a picture of Charles Fort, who is the gentleman who first really started collecting these kinds of phenomena reports. But he was into all kinds of things, strange falls of fish from the sky to weird luminous phenomenon. Before there were UFOs, there were flying saucers. Before there were flying saucers, there were just weird lights in the sky, and he was the one chronicling them. Not going to go into too much detail about these guys, but hey, they're both from Yale. Alexander Wendt, the guy on the top left, was the student of Raymond Duval, the guy on the bottom, and they came up with this really excellent, very academic-ese style writing called Sovereignty and the UFO, and it's a really important paper, especially because it is written in academic-ese, and so I think will convince a lot of academics about the import of UFOs and why the government and military establishments don't want to acknowledge it. They really explain it pretty well as far as it just being it's a threat to their legitimate monopoly on violence. So they say. The paper was actually incorporated into Chapter 27 of UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record, which is published by Leslie Kean, which, hey, made the New York Times bestseller list. And Alexander appeared at the 2013 symposium in North Carolina, which attracted some news reporting, not as much as some of the more sensationalistic disclosure events that happened earlier this year. All of this led me in the 1990s to the magazine scene, the zine scene, with the desktop publishing revolution that was coming about because of little Macintoshes on people's desks. There was a lot of people publishing their own magazines, and this is how I met the amazing group of people that I've befriended over the years and continue to correspond with about these subjects. Great magazines like Crash Collusion, which was published here in Austin, Excluded Middle out of California. Arcturus Books wasn't really a magazine, but it was a self-published catalog, and the fellow who was running that, Bob Gerard, just passed away a couple of years ago. It's really a sad loss, but it was one of those things, when you got it in the mail, he had written little reviews of every obscure book on UFOs and consciousness and conspiracies and magic and psychedelics that you could imagine. It was great heady times. All of which led me to publish my own zine for a very short period of time. That's it there on the left, the very first issue back in the summer of 1994. And it was called ELF-Infested Spaces, after Terence McKenna's Elf-Infested Spaces. But the ELF because, well, there were these ubiquitous stories of mind control that I kept coming across. And lots of research out there about the psychoactivity of electromagnetic fields and how these various technologies could be used to manipulate people, and usually for not very good purposes. But I've listed some of the amazing documents that I came across over the years and reprinted when I could. There have been a number of really important UFO studies over the years that go to these more alternative theories of UFOs. UFOs, the Pineal Connection by Serena Roney Dougal. This one I just found out about recently, topographic brain mapping of UFO experiencers. Wow. One of my favorites, A Testable Theory of UFOs, ESP, Aliens, and Bigfoot by the Synchronicity author, Alan Vaughan, where he basically coordinated some of the data between the effects of geomagnetic activity on these reports of various types of phenomenon. But those top two ones were the ones that really got me scratching my head. The bibliography on psychoactivity of electromagnetic fields is just page after page after page of scientific papers about the effects of ELF and other phenomena, or other electromagnetic radiation on physical responses and psychological responses. And a number of them were at military bases where, gee, there's been a lot of UFO activity. It just kind of made me scratch my head. But really, it was perhaps Strieber early on in Communion where he talks about the idea that the human brain and various body parts, the heart especially, all give off electromagnetic fields, and that perhaps these could be manipulated. A more acute technology than our own might be able to mediate mental and physical function to a great degree. And this just spurred my interest in investigating this aspect of it. But he even went so far as to point out that these electromagnetic effects are in the range of the he doesn't mention it here, but the Schumann resonance, the fields of the planet herself, and that really started me down that path. Now, I mentioned earlier that I've had a few of my own strange experiences, one of which was an experience of dream switching that I had in high school with my best friend. Again, nothing too dramatic, but at the time it seemed pretty significant to me, and that was basically, without going into the far too personal details, I had a dream. I went to bed intending to dream about a young lady that I had seen that night. I was really focused on this. But instead, I had a dream unlike any dream I had had and never had since, and that was like I was drowning in a sea of paperwork. I was worried about my high school homework, but I never worried about high school homework in high school. So the weekend ends, I go back to school, and I start hanging out with my best friend, and he proceeds to tell me, he said, "Man, I had the weirdest dream. I dreamed about this girl, and, well, some things happen." And he starts describing her, and it's the girl. It is her. And I even, at some point, he described her. I broke out a photograph I had of her, and he's like, "That's her, but her hair was different, and she was wearing blah, blah, blah." And he describes to a T what she was wearing. And her hairstyle was different. And that made me start thinking, okay, well, wait a minute, people can switch dreams? And over the years, I became increasingly aware of all the dream telepathy experiments that have gone on, the ability of people to influence other people's dreams. There's been a number of different studies about this where somebody's in the dream state and somewhere else in the lab or elsewhere, the other participant tries to affect the person's dreams. And usually it's really akin to the remote viewing data, where somebody starts thinking of, certain types of shapes or houses or concentrates on a photo, and sure enough, though, that same imagery will end up in the dream of the other person sleeping. And then I found out about the Linda Lane Magellan's Mutual Dreaming book, and it is filled with examples of this. And one of the most interesting things, perhaps, is that while it seemed that in my dream switching experience that the dream switching likely happened at the same time, that's not necessarily always the case. In a lot of the cases in the Mutual Dreaming book, the dreams occur between people when on different nights, but they haven't told each other about them. That's the main important thing here, that they haven't communicated about these and influenced each other in their dreams that way. But it seems like, as most of y'all probably know, that consciousness seems to not be bound by space and time, and the dream time certainly is not, and that people can seem to interact with each other, not just simultaneously while they're two sleeping at the exact same time, but even on different nights without having told each other about the dreams. It's just very strange. And I also came across other reports in the Austin MUFON Journal newsletter for 1995. Someone submitted a shared abduction experience dream where they basically had what they would call an abduction dream, but there was no UFO. They found themselves in a military facility, naked, with a bunch of other people. And these kinds of stories I heard over and over and over again from abductees in the support group that I ran, where they were being herded into this facility and made to having tests done on them. And the person telling this story wakes up in bed and it's like, well, that's really weird, and they're achy all over as if they've been doing something physical. And the next day they're at work, they're telling one of their friends about this experience, and somebody else, another coworker, walks in and says, what are y'all talking about? And it's like, oh, just weird dreams. It's like, man, I had the weirdest dream last night. And this other coworker proceeds to relate the exact same dream, and this person had never expressed any experience with abduction, and in fact was from a rather conservative religious group. So that, and then there's other examples. A close friend of mine, his mother related to me an experience where she apparently she shared a near-death experience with her husband who was murdered. And this friend is a very close, long-term friend of mine, and thank goodness he's still here. But when she was 5 months pregnant, she started to go to sleep as her husband was leaving to go to the corner store. And she had a dream of going up a heavy canopied path in a forest with light at the end of the path. And she's with him, and they're talking about their relationship. And as they get to the top and they see the sky and the bright light, he starts telling her about his experience of death and how he'd been stabbed in the heart and was trying to get the store owner to understand and call the ambulance. And he described, going out of his body and seeing his body, and basically tells her he has to go. And she tries to keep up with him as he's going up the path, and she's getting closer and closer to the light at the top of the path in this canopied tree-lined tunnel. And he says, no, you can't go. And then she wakes up, sees that the bike's not there, goes to the corner store, and he's been killed. And the cops are terrible. They're just like, go home, we'll tell you all what's going on. And, well, a few days after the funeral, she was pondering suicide. And as she was falling asleep, she focused on, on trying to make a decision about whether she was going to kill herself. And remember, she's pregnant with my friend. And then she feels a presence in the room and sees her husband naked and glowing with a soft, beautiful white light, and basically tells her, this is our son, take good care of him. And she has. So it's just experiences like that tell me that there's an ability for us to all inhabit and co-experience what to my mind is like a virtual reality, and that's the dream time. And that if these things are possible, then perhaps there's something else possible in the UFO phenomenon. Quickly, another interesting book, Brad Steiger, who of course has written so many subjects, in one of his other classics, Gods of Aquarius, he asked Michael Talbot, who wrote, of course, The Holographic Universe, which is, again, filled with a lot of the same kinds of themes that we're talking about tonight, about his ideas about the UFO phenomena being a protean psychoid phenomenon. And he introduced me to the phrase omnijective, which I really like because so much of the UFO literature is filled with descriptions of both subjective and objective descriptions of encounters. And so much so that anthropologist, friend of mine years ago, we coined the phrase sobjective, because these are sob stories, People have these horrible things happen to them sometimes, and sometimes glorious things that cause tears of joy. But I think omnijective is perhaps a better phrase. But he, again, stressed the same idea that we already went over in terms of Kenneth Ring's ideas. But it's perhaps Paul Devereaux's research that has most influenced me. As I started hearing about this weird Earth lights phenomenon, the apparent luminous lights that are generated by the Earth due to earthquake lights, or rather earthquakes and tectonic stress. He's been researching this for many, many years. He, with his fellow researchers, did a really awesome project called the Dragon Project, where they were using a variety of instruments to study sacred sites and standing stone circles. And he's expressed an idea that's really taken root in my heart, and that's this idea that these earth energies were known by these ancient cultures, and that they more or less created these standing stones as almost like acupressure points on the Earth's surface. And the more I read his material, the more data I just find that supports this contention that we have just really lost touch with our truest selves. And among the things he talks about is how there are hundreds of dream incubation sites in Greece alone. It was a very common phenomenon to have people go to these temples and go into these pits specifically for the task of dreaming, and the pits were in the earth to receive the gnosis up through the mother goddess. And time and time again we see these ancient sacred sites that are built over fissures, over grottos. So much of the Blessed Virgin Mary sightings occur near streams, running water. Some of the most famous cases involve the creation of new springs, when the young girl, hears the voice or sees a vision of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and she's telling her to dig and bathe in the dirt at a specific location, and she starts digging, and then guess what? A spring emerges. And these dreaming temples were built often over these locations, and of course later other cultures would take over those sites and build their own churches on top of them. Kind of interesting how that went on over and over again. But in 1995, this is a seminal year for me in coming to grips with these phenomena. He wrote a really powerful article called Beyond Ufology, where he talked about all the things we talked about in the last lecture and that we're talking about tonight. The importance of altered states of consciousness, the research of Rick Strassman on DMT, Terence McKenna's perspectives that this is some kind of history-haunting phantasm that is somehow tied to the earth. And he cites Kenneth Ring's work, and tons of other little data. In fact, I was just telling Jim Beal, he's cited in that book Earth Mind, in terms of talking about the effects of these various electromagnetic fields on human physiology and consciousness. And on a more recent topic, the issue of fracking, did you know it's really easy to generate luminous phenomenon? And in fact, there's been research into this, at least as far back as '92, with fluid injection causing luminous phenomena. And of course, just a few years ago, Arkansas put an emergency halt order because of all the microquakes that were being caused by the injection of various fluids and gases into the Earth Mother. And it just seems to me that there's bound to be humans who have kind of figured this out and might be using this to their advantage. But now, in 2005, I was lucky enough to MC the Texas Ghostlights Conference, which was organized by my good friend Rob Riggs there. This conference had Rob speaking, who is the author of In the Big Thicket, On the Trail of the Wild Man, as well as a contributor to Weird Texas. And he's got a new book coming out. In fact, we're going to have him speak here in Austin early next year about his latest Bigfoot research. And the Texas Ghost Lights Conference also featured Paul Devereaux and Nick Redfern and another fellow who has been doing research on the Marfa Lights out in West Texas. And that's one of the amazing things about this phenomenon is you see, if you research what are called, ghost lights, but there's a number of different names regionally. Because they always get titled wherever they occur, like the Brown Mountain Lights, and the one out in East Texas is often known as the Bragg Light. But here in Texas, we've got this dichotomy of East Texas, swampy, overgrown forest, big thicket, and then out in West Texas, we've got this desert region, and both support a weird luminous phenomenon. Now, the thing about this luminous phenomenon is a number of the researchers who I respect and have been reading over the years talk about these BOLs, these balls of light, and their relevance to this UFO phenomenon. As I mentioned, humans have always felt themselves to be in contact, and they've always reported these balls of light as acting in a purposive sort of way. And in fact, I've had 2 near misses with ball of light phenomena, and unfortunately didn't get to see them myself. When I was in elementary school, my class went out to Pioneer Farms outside Austin, and boys got to spend the night in the barn, girls got to spend the night in the attic in the log cabin. Big electrical storm that night. Next morning, we find out that the girls had quite a shock when a ball of light entered the attic, scared the bejesus out of them. And, I've since corroborated that with one of the girls who was there. I was like, did I hallucinate that? Was I making up memory of that? She's like, oh, no, that really happened. But I missed it. That close. Years later, at a party of a friend of mine's, it was stormy, those Texas thunderstorms, and there was a place that some of my friends, we'd walked to nearby, and there was kind of a depression in the ground. I didn't go past that point, came back to the house, left. It may have been weeks, may have been years later, I heard the tale that some friends had gone back to that spot later that evening, and they had witnessed a ball of light moving around that depression against the wind and then moving off. And they followed it for a little while. And no, they didn't have any close encounter. No, they didn't think it was talking to them. But that is not that uncommon with these balls of light. They often seem to have a purposiveness and a life of their own, and often seem to respond to not just the verbalizations of the witness, but sometimes their thoughts. If you recall, also the classic Foo Fighters described that sort of phenomenon of the balls of light dancing on the wingtips of the military aircraft.
Miles, what is purposive?
A purposiveness, it's a word I made up.
Okay, purposeful.
Purposeful, yeah, that's the word.
What am I missing? Miles has some wonderful new word there.
I make them up as quick as I can.
Purposeful.
Another researcher whose books I've been really fascinated by that cite over and over again all the medical literature and electromagnetic literature on the physiological effects and consciousness effects of electromagnetics is this British fellow, Albert Budden, whose the British version of his book is called Allergies and Aliens, the Electromagnetic Indictment. And the American version is just called Psychic UFOs. But his basic premise is that, you may have heard about people who are hypersensitive to chemicals, can't get near, the fumes of gas or various other types of chemicals cause them extreme reactions. Well, there's also people who are electromagnetically hypersensitive, who can't wear a watch, can't be near computers, can't be under 60 hertz frequency fluorescent lighting. And his suspicion, or his contention, is that these phenomena represent the collective unconscious trying to, as several other people have suggested, make us believe in them, but that it's a result of electropollution. And he has some pretty compelling arguments in his 2 or 3 books on the subject, but another aspect that he talks about is the ability of this phenomena to, a la a poltergeist, telekinetically manipulate the physical environment, and sometimes even use everything from water vapor to dust particles to larger size physical objects to cobble together a physical form through which to interact with the witness. Now, granted, this may seem like a pretty wild idea, but I think if you at least just stick to his electromagnetics hypothesis, it's pretty convincing. He says the unconscious responds to external geo-generated EM fields during altered states of consciousness and presents perceptions and realities that are dramatizations of alien contact in order to establish an acceptance of the unconscious within society. Again, this is a theme that we see over and over in the researchers I'm focusing on. And there are a lot of different researchers who have espoused some variation of this planetary poltergeist idea. And I describe them as being part of the para-crypto-ufological perspective. Now, one of them, the third one there, Thomas Bullard, is a folklorist who I like a lot, but he hates these guys. I mean, he's probably friends with a lot of them, but he really just is like, come on, you're replacing one unknown with another unknown. And I certainly realize that's a fairly valid argument, but again, I think there is a lot of valid parapsychological data that backs up these strange phenomena, from telepathy to telekinesis and other psychic effects. All of which was, talking about this in terms of a planetary poltergeist led me to this idea of a Gaian possibility. Paul Devereaux talks about the humanity's shamanism technology, this lost tech and techniques for accessing the world around us, the information-rich environment that Huxley's Mind at Large posits we can access through psychedelic consciousness. And as I mentioned, this belief in balls of light as being disembodied consciousnesses and spirits, and within all the UFO lore and the contactee stories, whether it's belief in some kind of ascended masters under Mount Shasta, or ideas about Shambhala, or the Vril, or even in the science fiction pulp of Shaver and Ray Palmer, there's this consistent imagery of inner Earth mythology, and I'm thinking that this is more the result of yes, that's where this is coming from, and that's why there are these overtones. There's also a lot of serpent imagery, and I think this is indicative of the Earth Spirit. A good friend of mine just acquired a copy of a book that I was going to mention in here but did not, and that's Dr. Greg Little's book, People of the Web, which talks a lot about the Amerindian mound culture. There are thousands of these mounds across the United States, and they're rather saucer-like if you think of them from a side view. The buzzing sounds and the hive-mindedness of the beings, I think there's a lot there, both in terms of the electromagnetic aspects with the buzzing sounds, but there's also a lot of ancient traditions that deal with the oracular, the dispensation of prophecy and wisdom from the gods and their messengers, that they often were heard in association with the buzzing of bees. So I think it's not just the electromagnetic, sound, but that there's some aspect of the symbolicness there, but also that it points to this idea of a hive, like the bees. and this hive-mindedness, this hierarchy that is so often evident in the theosophical traditions of so many esoteric groups, whether it's the Ashtar Command and their various levels up their command structure to the various ascended masters and white lodges. I think perhaps these are reflections of the onion-like layers of the collective unconscious. And good old McKenna, talking about one possible view of the flying saucers, that is a kind of projection from the consciousness of the planet, that is Gaia. I think in that sense, Jung was really onto something when he saw it as coming from the unconscious, almost as though the UFO is a manifestation of Gaia as Mother Goddess. Now, I'll interject here. Carla Turner did not espouse a Gaian perspective on this. As I say, she did speculate about the possibility of some perhaps crypto-terrestrial population that regarded us as property. But one of the things that I think she most importantly added to the dialogue of UFO abductions was the idea of the virtual reality scenario. And she talked about this a lot in her lectures, and gave examples where the abductee, the experiencer, would see and witness and experience one thing, but nearby witnesses would see something quite different, but still anomalous and weird. And there are a few examples of this out there that you can find where repeaters, as UFO researchers sometimes call them, abductees who had ongoing repeated experiences. There are occasions where the researcher would follow the experiencer and watch them have an experience but never leave their vehicle, like sitting in their car, and then later on they relate that, the UFO came down and I had this experience. And it's not that these people are lying. They seem to have had a more, probably some kind of out-of-body type of experience. And so many of the descriptions of these close encounters have the quality of out-of-body experiences. But here she's getting to her conspiratorial view that I don't disagree with, that the abductees are reporting alien-controlled information, and that they're in control. That this alien other force is actually in control of the perceptions of the experiencer. One of the other few people who's published a lot on the idea of Gaian consciousness at the heart of the UFO phenomena is this fellow David Perkins, the founder of Spirit Magazine. Really great guy. Hey, he's from Yale too. And this guy, Rupert Sheldrake. I love it. Back in the 90s, New Science of Life was declared by Nature the best candidate for burning there has been for many years. Now, I find a lot of ideas Sheldrake has espoused really important in this, and that's this idea of fields being not necessarily the physical electromagnetic fields that we've been talking about and conceptualizing, but as more of an abstract idea. And I think that they have relevance to the realms of psi and remote viewing. And I've often tried to put it this way: if there are, to me, morphic fields and morphic resonance is kind of akin to the various esoteric ideas about the Akashic records and the collective unconscious. And I suspect that pretty much any idea can be its own field, and that field can be accessed non-locally by consciousness. And it just makes me wonder, I'm reminded of the famous incident where that military remote viewer of much ill repute was fooled into remote viewing Santa Claus, but he thought it was a Soviet missile attack because, there was some metal rocket going across the North Pole. It was red and it was heading to the United States. So, of course, he saw it as a missile attack. But what had he been tasked with remote viewing? Santa Claus. So if something as unreal or psychoid, as quasi-real as Santa Claus, can be remote viewed, well then that pretty much means to me that that these Akashic fields can be tapped, and I suspect they may be one way of communicating across vast distances in the way that we think of SETI doing, but without the electromagnetic radio waves. British ufologist Jenny Randles talked about the Oz factor, which is this sort of closing off of all perceptions around the experiencer, and that seems to help in the tuning in of the message that's about to bombard their consciousness. And again, I think this has relevance to Sheldrake's species field. And in several of her books, Mind Monsters and Beyond Explanation and others, she put forth this idea of synchronistic reality mode and the ability for the human mind to take in this anomalous information in a parapsychological way and create kind of a virtual reality telepresence experience. And, you know, we're now moving into the realm of where we've got this technology ourselves. These are two examples of, you know, one is a wearable eye, like the Google Glass. This is years before Google Glass, but this person is basically getting some information about somebody who's buried in the ground in the form of a hologram in front of them that looks rather like a ghost, but it's just basically they're interacting with some kind of informational field, and it's portraying information in a augmented reality, a virtual reality. And the other example is what a lot of you can get now on your cell phones, where if somebody else has tagged the area you are with metadata, you can extract that and it can be displayed on your phone. Much in perhaps the same way that people, when they go into haunted houses, are tapping into some kind of informational field that's there about the past existences in that field. And this gets to what I'm suggesting, that I think that the phenomena can be interacted with in a way that's more akin to that portrayed in Carl Sagan's book and movie Contact with Jodie Foster. So instead of using radio waves, there's some other kind of biological field that can be tapped into, and that we can experience these things as perceptually real, but they may be from, you know, real beings somewhere else, or they could be right here, just in one dimension over. And here is Jenny saying basically that very idea, that aliens are in contact but not actually coming to Earth. They are only capable of long-range probes that treat abductees like receiving radio telescopes. These psychic people are used to communicate, extract information about us, and engage in interspecies relationships at a deep level of our inner selves. As such, the aliens are real, the contact with them not physical, the experience of contact subjective but reflective in a psychosocial sense of the mental rate being conducted, hence the extent to which these experiences are visualized and dramatized in this way. Now, she's not saying this is absolutely what she believes. This is in an email exchange on one of the more active UFO lists, where she's just saying, look, here's a couple of ideas that I think are probable, and this is the one I keep coming back to. And Valet again. I somehow in all these years missed this, but I'd heard him talk about his 5 arguments against the extraterrestrial origin of UFOs, but I somehow missed the part where he said, or it could be Gaia. Sure enough, he says there's 2 variants of the ideas he's expressing. An alien intelligence, possibly Earth-based, could be training us towards a new type of behavior. It could represent the visitor phenomena of Strieber, or some form of supernature, like Lyle Watson talked about, possibly along the lines of a Gaia hypothesis. And a variant of that is a variation on the Jungian collective unconscious idea. Who's that man with the cigar? That's Dennis Stillings. He was the publisher, the editor of one of my favorite UFO books, greatest title ever, Cyberbiological Studies of the Imaginal Component in the UFO Contact Experience. And I had a real strange synchronicity as I was reviewing this recently, because I had forgotten that the phrase that he introduced me to, cyber physiology and cyber biology, was coined by Medtronic Incorporated co-founder Earl Bakken. Well, that's probably not going to mean anything to y'all, but there's a couple of people here who know a local abductee who is involved. Medtronic is involved in a massive lawsuit having to do with bone grafts and some strange technology. But it was really a surprise to me to see Medtronic being part of, not just mentioned as the originator of this phrase, but basically the founder or co-founder, Earl Bakken, was at the center of the group that Dennis Stillings and his Arceus project were congealing around. But anyway, the important thing here is this idea of cyber biology, the consciousness-related aspects of relations to ourselves and to other systems, including the environment. And this gets again to this idea that somehow we're in this biofeedback type relationship with this phenomenon. And I quote myself here from several years ago: the UFO phenomena exists in a synergistic cybernetic interface with humanity, whatever the true nature of UFOs. They interact with us within several different milieus, all of which are influenced by the media and culture. This media and culture in turn feeds back into the phenomena in a continuous cycle. And I think that's kind of where we've been spinning our wheels, or at least most mainstream UFO research has been, I think, spinning its wheels by not breaking out of that cycle. And here again, Stillings is putting forth this idea that we're dealing with some sort of cyber biological planetary poltergeist. Another writer, researcher, is retired Colonel Thomas Bearden, who wrote a really fascinating book called The Excalibur Briefing. And the image on the left kind of gets to what I was trying to describe earlier, the onion-like aspect of the collective unconscious or the Akashic records, and this idea that we could be interacting through this phenomena, the transpersonal channel that I've been trying to describe here, that we could be interacting with various aspects of our own individual collective, or our own individual unconscious, the collective unconscious of the entire species, or as he breaks it down to family, city, state, creed, nation, race, geographical area, species, biosphere, and the universal. And I think, again, that there are these hierarchies, and that at any of those levels there could be a variety of independently operating consciousnesses that we could be interacting with. I really think that it's quite possible that perhaps the reason we experience these apparent alien others as insectoid, the mantis type that some people have reported, or reptoid, as several people have described, may be that's the way they appear to us, because their ultimate origin could be the collective species unconscious of the insect kingdom. I mean, my God, we are committing insecticide every day. It would seem to be in their best interest to try to convince us to stop damaging the ecology of the planet.
Especially the bees.
Yeah, the bees, yes, the hive mind. Now, and in fact, if you see that middle image there, that's what he calls this Zarg. That's what he describes the collective unconscious as. It's this dragon-like beast with the earth in its arms, but kind of cropped out there at the top is this little insect that's about to sting and wake up the sleeping giant. Now, there's a lot of reasons to maybe perhaps not take this guy too seriously. He really had some radical ideas about the nature of weaponized scalar technology. But then again, what do I know? I mean, this guy's apparently a physicist. And interestingly enough, you can find that paper, Brain Matter Mind Model Consistent with Quantum Physics and UFO Phenomena, on the DoD military website. That's where I got my copy recently. I don't know if he like mailed this to them in 1979 or if they had one of their operatives there monitoring it, but it's there on the website from 1979.
He worked for the Army Missile Command for many years and is now a retired expert in psychotronics. And he's put out some very good papers early on. Yeah.
And here's a couple of other interesting drawings that describe the tolpoid aspect of this. And again, he's basically putting forth that same planetary poltergeist idea that our collective anxieties are psychically manifesting in a worldwide type of poltergeist activity that causes physical manifestations. Now, he went so far as to suggest that the cattle mutilation phenomena is the result of the Soviets' hate for America. So, as I say, some of his ideas I'm not so sure about, but they make for interesting reading, that's for sure. I think nowadays he's operating out of the same facility as Greer and that weather warfare guy, Stephen something. All right, back to Valet. And this is a little tangent here, but I think, again, it goes to the strange synchronistic nature of the phenomenon. And Valet, you may have recently seen, gave a TED Talk at the Brussels version of that, where he talked about the need for a physics of information. Now, he first talked about this, I'm first aware of, in his 1979 book, Messengers of Deception, where he described, now he's a hammer, he sees nails. He's a computer scientist, so he sees a cosmic bulletin board. He had a very strange synchronicity while he was while he was researching the various contact UFO cults in the 70s, and one of the ones that he was researching was the cult of the Order of Melchizedek. And it wasn't until he got home and was looking over his receipts for his day's travels that he discovered that the cab driver that he had on one of the days he was researching Melchizedek happened to be the only Melchizedek in the Los Angeles area. He also is the one who helped come up with the help of Ingo Swann, the idea of coordinate remote viewing, this idea that you can just assign any string of random letters or numbers as the coordinate instead of, say, latitude and longitude for a target that one is going to psychically remote view, and that somehow that's all it takes for the human mind to zero in on this. And he talks about this in this Brussels lecture, as well as some other synchronicities. He talks about how on July 20th, a friend of theirs who was going to be in a play was asking, do you have any French books? And of course, he's French. He's got a ton of French books. So I think his wife grabs a book at random. It's the René Barjaval's Le Pau César. I don't speak French. I'm not sure. But he opens the book at random, and the phrase he comes across is, I was in the Boeing that blew up after takeoff at Kennedy Airport, a bomb in the hold, 132 dead, remember? And this was just 3 days after the TWA 800 air disaster. And that struck him as just highly improbable that the random place he would go to, opening up a book, would seem to be so resonant with such a recent incident. And it's little things like that, and most researchers have experienced the phenomena of being in the library and sometimes a book literally falling off the shelves in front of you that happens to be the piece of information you were looking for. And you can look at this as divine providence, or perhaps there is some kind of magical intentionality at work here. I think it's likely that the nature of space-time is a strange attractor that's responsive to human consciousness. Perhaps along the same lines, on this tangent, is that thing called the Fortean name game. Now, these quotes aren't really relevant to the Fortean name game, which John Keel and Lauren Coleman and a number of other anomalists years ago started noticing the higher than normal occurrence of certain names among witnesses. There are a number of names that you would think if these events are random, then you would get a lot of Smiths and Roberts, and the more common names would be the names of the witnesses that you come across. But over and over again, they noticed certain less common names like Reeves and Warren and Lafayette and others. And of course, some of these names like Fayette have pretty symbolic overtones and long lineages, and so they started calling this the Fortean name game, and John Keel even went so far as to point out that there would be events where two completely unrelated sets of witnesses would have similar sightings on the same day and have the same last name, but they don't know each other at all. And these things happened enough that they really felt that there's something significant to this. And it's these things that, okay, maybe you could suspect that, okay, if the alien reproduction extraterrestrial hypothesis is true, that maybe they're going after certain family lineages, and that happens to be people with certain names. That certainly could be true, but it just seems more informationally related. It seems more akin to Vallee's physics of information. But there's another darker aspect of this, which gets into Loren Coleman, who is one of the people who's written the most about the name game. He started talking about it more in terms of Twilight language, and the phrase Twilight language has its origins in, I believe, Tantric Buddhism and various other esoteric traditions where they would previously they would pass down the information verbally, but at some point they had to start writing it down, and they would employ several tricks like metaphor and analogy, and to hide the meaning from the uninitiated. And so, in other words, they would write things out in a sort of Twilight language. And when he uses it now, the strange thing about Loren Coleman is he's most known for being the world's leading cryptozoologist and somebody hunting Bigfoot and anomalous animals. Like there's the fake coelacanth on the wall behind him there, and he's founded the International Cryptozoology Museum up in Portland, Maine. But he's also a licensed social worker and lectures on the phenomenon of suicide clusters. You may recall the phenomenon that seemed more prevalent before the mass shooting phenomenon of mass suicides, of often a teenager commits suicide, or a couple of teenagers might commit suicide in a pact, and the ripple effect within that community, often other kids who are at risk would then succumb and attempt suicide as well. He lectures to local civic groups about this, trying to help prevent these sorts of things. He's gone on to write a fantastic book called The Copycat Effect. I say fantastic, it's actually a very dark, difficult book to get through because it is about such a dark and difficult thing. But this idea of Twilight language is something that he and a few other writers have talked about, and I think there's something to it. He quotes Michael Hoffman, who wrote Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare, about this idea of occult crimes. The objective is not linear, that is to say, it is not solely bound to the achievement of the immediate effect of the attack on the victim, but may in fact be part of a larger symbolic ritual magnified by the power of the electronic media. And he says the same thing appears to be happening with these Mothman and Fortean events. Hoffman continues, if we are observing a ritual working, we should be looking for relevant synchronicities which form a pattern. Now, that may seem far afield, and so is this, but there seem to be a variety of these strange experiences where some of these terrible real-world events are presaged. You may recall there's a famous story that seems to presage the sinking of the Titanic. Well, there are similarly stories that presage things like the Oklahoma City bombing and the bombings of Ted Kaczynski, but we'll touch on that maybe some other time. All right, another really long quote from Vallee, but The bottom line of which is, let me summarize my conclusions thus far. UFOs are real. They are an application of psychotronic technology. That is, they are physical devices used to affect consciousness. They may not be from outer space. They may, in fact, be terrestrial-based manipulating devices. Their purpose may be to achieve social change on this planet. Again, this is from 1979. And then a few years ago, my good friend Greg Bishop interviewed Dean Radin, the parapsychologist that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Really great research being done by this fellow. And in this quote, he basically talks about some of the ideas he's talked about with Vallée, about this idea of psychotronic devices and how they could affect the local geomagnetic environment in ways that affect people's consciousness, sometimes perhaps as an unintended byproduct of whatever the device is intended to do. I've heard of other stories from some military personnel where they talk about, various propulsion technologies that have as a side effect the creation of hallucination in the minds of people nearby. But he's basically suggesting, and he starts off by talking about Fatima, the vision of the ball of light that Vallée and others have thought of as a possible UFO that resolved into an apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary being perhaps something like this. Now, of course, as far as we know, there was no such technology in the hands of humans to do that back then. But again, maybe this was one of these Earthlight type manifestations that was tuning into the local belief system field, or the Sheldrakean morphic field of the local belief structures of the witnesses. All of which has led me over the years to continue investigating these reports I've heard, about the CIA's MK-Ultra project. And the thing that just continues to blow me away every time I delve into this is just how widespread this program was and how much it seems to be a case of us becoming our worst enemy. If you've ever heard of Project Paperclip, the importation of the Nazi scientists from Germany after World War II, there were hundreds of these scientists that were seeded throughout the United States educational system, across universities from one coast to the other. And in some cases, maybe they're like von Braun. They just, help us with our rockets or something. But time and time again, if you research MK-Ultra, and the best book I found to date is that one on the right there by Hank Albarelli Jr., A Terrible Mistake, The Murder of Frank Olson, and the CIA's Secret Cold War Experiments. That book is huge, and it is so filled with facts about the CIA's MK-Ultra program. And it's not just MK-Ultra. There were so many sub-programs, MK-Naomi, MK-Delta, Bluebird, and, of course, then there are the rumors that have yet to be substantiated of Project Monarch. But all of these projects had as their aim things like a truth serum or a Manchurian candidate, a mind control assassin, or interrogation techniques. One of the things that I've heard repeatedly is that the church committee hearings in the 70s, that was the slap on the wrist to the CIA saying, "Oh, don't do that again," was played up in an attempt to downplay and misdirect away from the more heinous programs like Artichoke, which was apparently the operational use of these technologies. Now, what does this have to do with UFOs? Well, I don't know if you can see on the left there is this big ad for a TV series called Paranormal State. And up on the top of that building are these little black squares. Well, those little black squares are a nice, nifty technology called hypersonic sound. For years, people in the UFO field have heard reports of abductees and contactees talking about telepathy with these beings and hearing voices in their heads. Well, if you research MK-Ultra and these psychotronic technologies, over and over again you come across reports of apparent research into techniques and technologies for putting voices inside of people's heads. And hypersonic sound is the one that you and I can all get into if we want to. It's actually used legitimately in museums where they might want to have basically the effect is a shotgun directed audio, so that like you're standing in front of a painting, but only if you stand in the right spot will you hear the little description of the painting and how it was done. But if you move a foot over, you won't hear that. Well, this marketing campaign, you're walking along the street, you're going down the sidewalk, and you hear a voice in your head, and you may or may not figure out that, hey, you're being targeted by advertising. In fact, this has been used in such a way that I think is rather irresponsible. There was a court TV type show where the message you would hear was, "Have you ever thought about committing murder?" It's like, no, not until you suggested it. So, back when I joined INACS in late 2000, early 2001, I remember seeing this article on the left there, and this experiment talked about the scientists' ability to detect not just that the rat was dreaming about being in a maze, but where in the maze, in the dream, the rat was. And I thought, my God, have we come that far? One of the first things I remember talking to Jim King and the other INACS folks about was my lifelong desire to have a dream recorder. And this ability that if we could record our innermost experiences, our inner visions, our perception of reality or surreality in the case of dreams, and then we could share them, wow, what doors that would open perhaps. And you hear tales of technology that's supposedly light years ahead of this that our government has, techniques for synthetic telepathy. Well, that was 2001 on the left. A few years ago, 2008, 2009, was this news report about where they're at now and their ability to read the brain waves and discern images. Now, I suspect that this is actually not very accurate as far as this image of Steve Martin and the blurry image below being what they can extract. But I've seen some other images that they're not near as realistic as that, but I think that they're more accurate to where the level of technology is. But again, this is just 10 years worth of research right here that we know about. And again, the conspiracy community, myself included, have been saying for years that, well, everything seems to be at least 15, 20, God knows, maybe 30 years ahead within these black projects that we pay for with our tax dollars but don't know what they are. So I got to wonder. Again, back in 1992, that same lecture by Valet in Albuquerque, when he talked about Philip K. Dick, he also talked about the reports that he was getting from abductees who were complaining about their mistreatment at the hands of the mainstream abduction researchers. I did not include in this lecture the litany of examples of how bad the abduction research has gotten or did get over the years, largely I think through a misuse of hypnosis and just a drive to reaffirm certain belief systems. But hey, I've already admitted my biases. So, but in this example, he talks about cases that he has where it appears that people have been abused by various cults that then used alien imagery and hypnosis and probably drugs to cover that up with symbolism of the alien abduction experience. And I think he's basically hinting at stuff that he probably knows more about. Now, this guy is another spooky guy. Now, when I first started researching Earthlights, Paul Devereaux, Paul Devereaux, he's very much a Gaia kind of guy. But this guy, he's really very much the materialist, reductionist, hard science kind of guy. And while there are claims that, his research has yet to be replicated, this is the guy who claims to have what some call the God helmet, which is a series of magnets in a head-mounted device that can induce experiences similar to out-of-body experiences, similar to experiences of a felt presence, similar to abductions and close encounter type phenomena. He's also the writer and researcher who proposed the idea of tectonic strain theory that is part of the basis of the Earthlights hypothesis. But again, he doesn't seem to think that there's any necessarily alien other to any of this phenomena. He also put forth the idea that over the planet there could be what he called the geopsyche, but again, he's thinking in purely just psychological terms that these phenomena elicit hallucinatory experiences that tickle the part of our brain that gives us the feeling of spiritual qualities to these experiences. Now,
He can induce that with the helmet.
supposedly.
Yeah, supposedly.
Similar experiences. The people who've experienced it say, yeah, it really does what he claims. But he's got kind of a spooky background. There have been rumors for years of his having worked on a refrigerator-sized device that could be used for crowd control that would induce vomiting. And there are reports that this device was likely used against British activists who were protesting outside of military bases there. And again, throughout the literature are examples of people apparently being harassed by these technologies, and some of the very basic purported effects of things even as simple as Wi-Fi are agitation and inability to sleep. And some of you may have scratched your head when that recent Navy Yard shooting happened, and there were these reporters talking about words and phrases that the assailant had scratched into his shotgun, like "my ELF weapon." And, well, he was referring to these the apparent mind control effects of these extremely low frequency radio waves, which Persinger and others have suggested is the carrier wave for psychic functioning, and which can apparently also be involved in the induction of these weird experiences. Another interesting character is this fellow. He's really widely known in the New Age community and good friends of several folks here. He gave us a lecture here many years ago, and he's an interesting character. C.B. Scott Jones. He worked for Senator Claiborne Pell, investigating the paranormal, and he sought UFO disclosure on behalf of Lawrence Rockefeller. And he makes a lot of claims that I'm sure are totally true, but involve his using his psychic intuition to hunt for missile sites during his service as attaché in India, tasking psychic remote viewers for military and intelligence clients. But he also is purported to have described a very strange encounter with his friend Michael Drosnin, author of the Bible Code, that involved the FBI and their friend Drosnin apparently being targeted with some kind of electronic mind control device, which led him to give a warning to Dr. John Gibbons, the then science advisor to President Bill Clinton, regarding the Rockefeller UFO initiative. He said, quote, "I urge you to take another look in the UFO matrix of belief that I provided you last year. My mention of mind control technology was quite deliberate. Please be careful about this. There are reasons to believe that some government group has interwoven research about this technology with alleged UFO phenomenon. If that is correct, you can expect to run into early resistance when inquiring about UFOs, not because of the UFO subject, but because this has been used to cloak research and applications of mind control activity." So in other words, he's actually coming from a different angle on this, saying that that I guess people like myself are conflating the relevance of mind control research with UFO contact. And he's definitely in the camp of UFOs being extraterrestrial space brothers that are here to help us. His hypnotically retrieved memories of early childhood contact involve out-of-body experiences outside of a spacecraft and similar descriptions. And this is an angle that I've only recently become aware of, and I am not sure what to make of it. I mentioned earlier that everybody is an agent provocateur, and even old Carl Jung, whose ideas on the collective unconscious and the archetypes I incorporate so deeply into my ideas about UFOs. It apparently is not widely known, but is well established that he did work with the founder of the CIA, formerly OSS, Alan Dulles, in his psychological profiling of Hitler and the German people during the war. But it's been suggested by others that this may be where Alan Dulles got the idea, possibly, to use people's belief in the paranormal and specifically UFOs for psychological warfare purposes. In fact, a former chemist and researcher on the Manhattan Project, Leon Davidson, as far back as the 50s and into the 70s, was talking about this idea that the UFO phenomenon that he thought was likely real in terms of being something other than human, but was being manipulated by the CIA specifically as part of a Cold War tool to disinform the Soviets and for various other purposes. And there's a quote there from his 1975 letter to the UFO community warning about this. Now, MKUltra has a very lasting legacy. There's a lot of different cases during the 70s of these apparent mind control assassins. Whatever you want to say, here we are approaching the 50th anniversary of the JFK coup, assassination. We have, Lee Harvey Oswald, who may or may not have been a patsy, but strangely enough, H.P. Albarelli and others before him have found dramatic connections between the people surrounding Oswald, the MKUltra research mind control community, and the people at the beginning and birth of the modern UFO era. This is obviously too much to go into, but there are very bizarre links between all three of those areas. Sirhan Sirhan is another one, the one who killed Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, allegedly, who has from the beginning seemed to be a likely mind control candidate. Squeaky Fromm, who tried to kill Ford. There's been a number of different attempts over the years to get the truth out about these. The last one, from just a couple of years ago, the committee basically decided, it's just not worth it to try to find the truth about all these other, surviving mind control experimentee victims. It would do them no good, and certainly would do the government no good, since they'd probably have to pay out some money, which they've had to do in the past, paltry sums as it was. But there is ongoing litigation. Every year there are more and more people who finally find the courage to try and find the truth. But one of the things that I come back to over and over again is, we sure have suffered a lot because of these damned experiments. Ted Kaczynski, did y'all know that he participated in a CIA MKUltra program? He may not have been dosed with LSD, but he submitted willingly. He was a volunteer. He was not one of the unwitting experimentees in the MKUltra programs, but it's very well known that he participated in one of these experiments that seemed to have little or no scientific value. And gee, what did he go on to do, allegedly? Bomb a bunch of people and kill and maim several people. The mind control connections to Mark David Chapman, the assassin of John Lennon, are voluminous. And, did you all see the conviction of Whitey Bulger, the mafioso? Well, guess what? He also was an MKUltra victim. Like the alleged killers of Frank Olson, the subject of that book on the MKUltra I alluded to earlier, A Terrible Mistake. Frank Olson and Frank Olson's assassins and Whitey Bulger were both, mafioso types that got utilized in these prison experiments that were done by MKUltra. And then the mafiosos, in the case of the Frank Olson murders, were used by the CIA and the intelligence community for their own purposes, usually very nefarious purposes. So over and over again, we can see that the lasting legacy is that you and I have to fear for these crazy maniacs committing violent crimes in the name of big crime bosses that really the mafia aren't any different than the government. So, and then we have to pay for those reparations with our tax dollars. One of the other lasting myths legacies is the myth of Monarch. And Monarch, for those that don't know, is the more egregious version of the Manchurian Candidate that we do know they were trying to make. But Monarch has been much more difficult to pin down, and that's the persistent reports that of mind control sex slaves and mind control assassins and the use of children in these experiments to create dissociative states, multiple personalities for covert operation purposes. There's never been any evidence for its existence. However, there is plenty of evidence for the abuse of children during MK Ultra, at least through the use of electroshock on hundreds and hundreds of kids. Again, often orphans and the disenfranchised. Now, at the beginning of this, I talked about the many different classic cases that I grew up loving. Flatwoods Monster, 1952. Well, I'm not saying this is an explanation for it, but Nick Redfern has recently discovered a RAND document that was called, lost the name here. But it describes the use of superstition against, where is I have it here? Yeah, the exploitation of superstitions for purposes of psychological warfare, written for the Air Force back in 1950 by the RAND Corporation. And in it, there is a description of a particular psychological operation that was done in Italy to spook the locals. And it involves the creation of basically a robotic scarecrow that they would wheel into town and scare the natives with, supposedly. And he noticed the similarity in the description to this 12-foot being that was described in the Flatwoods case. Now, I'm not saying that this is a hard and fast explanation for this, but this particular creature has, as you can see, been immortalized in toys. It's appeared in several video games. It's an interesting critter. One of the first abduction cases before the Betty Hill abduction case has also come under scrutiny. I always found this case fascinating. Antonio Villalobos was out tilling his field. The tractor started stalling. He saw a UFO. It landed. Occupants came out. They gassed him, dragged him on board, and forced him to have sex with a very peculiar naked humanoid that barked like a dog. And then after he had had sex with her, pointed at her belly and then to the sky as if to imply, your children are coming with us up there. This is just one of a number of very bizarre cases that have happened in Brazil and South America. A few nights before this incident occurred, a very strange assault on some soldiers occurred at a fort in the city of Praia Grande, and it incapacitated several of the soldiers. The electrical systems at the fort went out, not once, but twice when the secondary systems kicked in. And this bright light was witnessed, and the two soldiers that were overcome with this heat wave were taken to hospital and treated for first and second degree burns over 10% of their body. Very strange case. And it's part of a continuum of strange cases that come from South America, including in the 1977 flap of the Chupa Chupas, sucker, from another region, an island of Colores. And about a decade later, Jacques Vallée went down and investigated, and he and others had discovered that there were apparent effects of microwave radiation. These people were being hit by beams of light and attacked by these things, and the folklore that was surrounding them was that these were American devices that were there to suck the blood of the natives for us rich North Americans. But one has to wonder if maybe this was the test bedding of some technology. Well, in 1978, an individual by the name of Bosko Nedeljkovic, who was an interpreter and translator at the Inter-American Defense College, started talking to abduction or UFO researchers in the States about his participation in various projects that he says basically were the ones perpetrating at least some incidences like the Via Boas abduction. He said that he was part of a 9-man helicopter team that abducted civilians and conducted both psychological warfare experiments and hallucinogenic drug tests, specifically in the Minas Gerais region of Brazil. Each team included a doctor, CIA, and Navy personnel, while the helicopter was equipped with a metal cubicle about 5 feet long and 3 feet wide, used somehow in the psychological warfare operations. I'll tell you what that reminds me of is the isolation coffins that were used by the psychiatrist Ewan Cameron in Canada, again as part of MKUltra, where they abused hapless Canadians who just were looking for a little psychological relief. Then the first publicized abduction in North America. Again, I'm not suggesting that this is the answer to this, but it's always struck me that the description that Barney Hill gave of the lead alien was that, well, besides a red-headed Irishman, that doesn't quite fit with any of the rest of it, but he said he looks like a German Nazi. He's a Nazi. That he had a uniform, a black scarf around his neck, and that was dangling over his shoulder, and there's his drawing that he did under hypnosis. Now, over time, his description came more into line with that of his wife and more in line with the standard gray alien with big eyes. Of course, folks who want to point to this as a true example of extraterrestrial encounter often point to the star map that Betty was able to describe, and then another researcher, I think Marjorie Fish, was able to extrapolate an actual constellation. But it's always struck me as interesting that he described these as Nazis. Well, if they were part of MKUltra, well, they basically were Nazis imported after the war. But there's other aspects of this case, like there was a strange beeping noise that they heard right before the experience, and there were descriptions of strange marks on the hood of the car that to me always struck me as like where somebody could have placed one of these psychotronic devices, if that's in fact what happened there. We are celebrating an anniversary of a couple of cases, one being this famous Army Reserve helicopter encounter. This is likely one of the cases that our originally scheduled presenter Nick Redfern was going to talk about because it involves the connection between UFOs of out-of-body experiences. He says Captain Coyne received telephone calls from people identifying themselves as representatives of the Department of the Army Surgeon General's office asking if he, Coyne, had experienced any unusual dreams subsequent to the UFO incident. As it happened, not long before the Army's call, Coyne had undergone a very vivid out-of-body experience. And Sergeant John Healy also reported being called about the incident and its aftermath. As time would go by, said Healy, the Pentagon would call us up and ask us, well, has this happened to you since the occurrence? And in two of the instances that I recall, what they questioned me was, number one, have I ever dreamed of body separation? And I have. I dreamed that I was dead in bed and that my spirit or whatever was floating, looking down at me, dead in bed. And the other thing was, had I ever dreamed of anything spherical in shape, which definitely had not occurred to me. Another famous case, the Pascagoula Clawmen from 1973. Always found this case fascinating, probably because it involved alien entities different than the classic short, big-headed, black-eyed aliens. These tall clawmen with elephant-like skin and claws for hands that just floated over the pier where these two gentlemen were fishing. Just struck me as very different than the other types of experiences. But according to Hank Albarelli and Zoe Martell, they've talked to a couple of different researchers who were chemists at Fort Detrick, which, of course, Fort Detrick is the big testing ground of so much of the chemical warfare that went on as part of MK Ultra, and they make the claim that this was somehow part of that experimentation, and they refer to something I've yet to find more information about called Operation Strange Man, which is said to have involved mutated human subjects. Sounds like it's straight out of the X-Files. These were experiments involving human subjects that went way beyond what anyone could imagine. Some of the findings and technology were transferred to Southeast Asia during the later stages of the war there. So here's just a short list of a lot of the different aspects of the idea of the weaponization of folklore, weapons of mass enchantment. You know, there have been persistent rumors that the sweet old J. Allen Hynek was actually monitoring the beliefs in UFOs of his scientific colleagues on behalf of the Air Force. I don't know if I believe that or not, but it seems like it could be true and not have been malicious. He's also an important part of Jacques Vallée's revelation about the Pentacle Memo, which involved a document that came out of Battelle Memorial Institute, which indicated that the famous Robertson panel of the 1950s or early 1950s, which was supposed to be an unbiased scientific investigation of, or assessment, not investigation, of UFOs, that they were basically told that in no uncertain terms they were not to be told about this research, which is called Project Stork, that involved the simulation of UFO waves and to gain data on the part of the military. It's unclear, as Vallée has gone on to say, that whether or not this project ever went forward, but it was clear that they were proposing that they stage large-scale UFO events to judge the reaction of the public. Now, the outcome of this panel, without even them being privy to this other research effort going on at Battelle and called Project Stork, was that they felt that there was definitely a psychological warfare potential for the phenomena. So even without knowledge of this other aspect, they came to basically the same conclusion. There's the RAND document I referred to. Also in Hank Albarelli's book, he talks about how the MK Ultra project employed magician Mulholland to investigate psychic researcher Andrea Puharich, as well as the famous Kelly Hopkinsville case, which makes me wonder, were they just trying to get his assessment of cases and people that they felt were not trustworthy, or were they trying to learn from experiments that they were conducting from a third party? There's just a number of cases of this throughout the literature that range from the classic Paul Benowitz case, and that too involves J. Allen Hynek, who allegedly delivered one of the computers to poor old Benowitz that was loaded with software on the part of the Air Force to convince him that he was in communication with aliens that he thought were going to invade. And former head of MUFON, James Carrion, has come, before stepping down from MUFON, moved in the direction of interpreting UFOs as a psychological warfare technique, and he went so far as to suggest that the Roswell incident was a disinfo ploy to cover up research that he uncovered and others have uncovered about the United States' efforts at creating a tsunami bomb, which apparently they were able to do, which calls into question any tsunami we've experienced ever since. And on and on and on. There's other examples. Hey, there's some artwork by my good friend and co-host Mac White, and excerpts from his article, Television and the Hive Mind, which just talks about, and another anniversary, what is it, 75th anniversary of the Halloween event, the War of the Worlds broadcast that supposedly drove so many people to madness. And he points out that psychologist Hadley Cantrill's study of the broadcast was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and affiliated with that project was CFR member, CBS exec Frank Stanton, who they're the ones who aired that famous broadcast, and he later became the chair of the board of the RAND Corporation. Oh, we just were talking about them. Cantrell, with Rockefeller money, established the OPOR at Princeton for the analysis of the OSS, CIA's propaganda. And in World War II, Cantrill and Rockefeller money assisted CFR, CBS reporter Edward R. Murrow in setting up the Princeton Listening Center to study the Nazi propaganda so that they could make their own better propaganda. And so it goes. So what's the purpose? Is there an attempt to manipulate human consciousness here? Well, a recurring meme is this idea of uniting humanity through a common enemy. And I think this is an idea that's fascinated me, and it's something that Vallée turned me on to, but it's, of course, something that Terence McKenna completely poo-pooed because he didn't believe in conspiracies at all. He felt that the phenomena was way too complicated for humans to control. But if you go back, there are all these instances, like John Dewey in 1917. Someone remarked that the best way to unite all the nations on this globe would be an attack from some other planet in the face of such an alien enemy. People would respond with a sense of their unity of interest and purpose. I know this sounds familiar to you because you've probably heard it from various other people. It was said by Sir Anthony Eden in 1947 and inspired the 1947 book Flying Saucer by Bernard Newman, which proposed the idea, which is also put forth in that Outer Limits episode, Architects of Fear, the idea of scientists creating a chimera, a fake alien threat, and staging events to unite humanity against a common foe. And again, Vallée was the one that turned me on to this in his 1979 book, Messengers of Deception, where he talked about something that had just become declassified in 1978, and that was the LCM, the London Controlling Section. Oh, I said LCM there. That's because it's an acronym from my day job. LCS, London Controlling Section, and what was called the Martian Conspiracy. The Brits called their psychological warfare people the Martians. And Vallée suggests that at the end of World War II, this joint deception campaign between the Allies, the Americans, and the British, that there was this sense of like, well, we've managed to unite our intelligence agencies and use these engines of deception. You might remember the inflatable tanks and the various sound effects and fog that were used to deceive the enemy. But could these same techniques be used to prevent another world war? And he suggested that this idea actually has perhaps gone forward. And I list some other thing. The Watchmen comic book and movie deals with this idea of a fake extraterrestrial threat. So does the humorous movie Canadian Bacon, where Alan Alda plays the president. And this is where you've got to remember good old Ronnie Reagan. Yeah, not so good. He no less than 3 times made these kinds of statements about us putting aside our differences and uniting against a outside threat. And of course, he, interestingly enough, referred to this outside threat as the threat of war. But he made this in 1985 in front of a high school student body and faculty at the General Assembly, at the UN, and at the Grand Ballroom for the National Strategy Forum. Now, we got video of some of these. Actually, there's video of all 3 of those. What we don't have to verify this quote is Henry Kissinger allegedly at the 1992 Bilderberg Conference in Evian, France, supposedly said, today America would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow they will be grateful. This is especially true if they were told there were an outside threat from beyond, whether real or promulgated. Now, supposedly this was transcribed from a recording, an audio recording. I have yet to hear this audio recording. I don't doubt that Kissinger said this, but again, I can't say it's fact. Again, there's a history of people that have been warning about this as a possibility. I mentioned previously Leon Davidson, formerly of the Manhattan Project, who wrote about this possibility that the CIA was using ECM, electronic countermeasures, to fake UFO sightings. And this gets to the heart of the palladium technology. Apparently, we've had for quite some time this technology to spoof objects on radar. And so, of course, the holy grail for most UFO researchers is we had witnesses and radar. There's physical trace cases and there's this technological device that tells us there's something there. But what we find is that that can be faked. This apparently was used widely in harassing the Cubans and the Soviets to try to ascertain the abilities of their electronic countermeasures and radar stations. Jean Petit talks about palladium in this 1960 to 1975 CIA document, Palladium Stealth and Countermeasures. And the idea of spooking the natives, so to speak, has been around for quite a long time. Peter Watson talks about, in 1978, the use of projecting images on clouds and using loudspeakers in psychological warfare to convince people of various things. The image on the right is from an article that appeared a few years ago. This isn't so much part of a grand deception, but it always reminded me of this idea of blue beam. Blue beam is a alleged technology that, again, has been hard to pin down as being true or not, but in the 1990s, a Canadian said that he had seen documents that there was a plan to stage a worldwide event that would project each of our ideas of a god or deity in the sky with holograms, and that we would each hear in our own language, in our heads, the voice of God. And while I've yet to see any evidence that actually exists, there's tons of other evidence that there is technology like that and that these kinds of ideas have been used. There's rumors that the Germans used to project the image of the Virgin Mary against French troops. And these, again, hearken to the techniques that were used by the Allies to win the war. But that particular image is there's a guy who wants to project the second coming, so to speak, over the Dome of the Rock in Israel. And boy, I think that could cause a lot of problems. And here, too, we get back to, in 2001, early 2001, pre-9/11, Dr. Stephen Greer, one of the most vocal and most media-savvy UFO proponents, held a very widely attended conference at the press club. And at that press club, Dr. Carol Rosen talked about how Dr. Werner von Braun had told her and warned her that there was going to be this kind of existential threat, an escalation of threats from terrorism to asteroids to an extraterrestrial invasion, that this was going to be used to justify space weapons. Greer went on to, post 9/11, say that, before 9/11, he actually issued a white paper where he was warning, and I agreed with him on this wholeheartedly, if the government does finally give us disclosure, don't believe them. That's where I agree with him wholeheartedly. Also, in the wake of 9/11, he claims to have seen movie scripts that anticipated the events of September 11th. We're getting close to the end here, but another idea I've been playing around with is the idea of 9/11 kind of as the mass landing that we've never gotten. Terrence McKenna talked about the possibility of a mass UFO sighting, but not a landing, where the UFOs would appear over major cities for an extended period of time. People would get telepathic communication from them, and then they would leave and leave us in the lurch, wanting for that salvation that never came. That's what Vallée is warned about, that we're being programmed to anticipate some sort of second coming or salvation from above. But on 9/11, there were a lot of UFOs in the sky in the form of unidentified blips on radars, and this makes me think about palladium and this technology of spoofing aircraft. And there are reports, both military and mainstream, about their ability to inject into the radar screens these false radar returns. And this may have actually confused the air traffic controllers and aided the perpetrators of that day's events. But everything about that event strikes me as kind of like a global near-death experience where we all kind of experienced the trauma of a near-death experience that day, live and on television. And it was the formation of a new subgenre in esoteric conspiracy research. And I think we've kind of been living in one of the PKD's alternate realities ever since, but that's a pretty deep rabbit hole. Meanwhile, in the last few years, hey, I did say that, UFOs are a great way of educating people to think critically and investigate the world around them. Well, apparently, I'm not the only person who thinks this is a great idea, because these are all the different events that have happened over the last couple of years in the UK, where they are constantly staging UFO crashes for little kids at primary schools and middle schools to wonder over. Now, some of these do not go over well with the parents or the children, and indeed one of these involved not a UFO, but a bloody crime scene where apparently they told the kids one of their teachers had been killed. But in the more benign ones, they help them participate, and the local law enforcement are involved. They come and cordon off the area, and it's all part of a creative writing process. There's a non-governmental organization called the National Literacy Trust, and their program, Everybody Writes, which is funded by the Department for Children, Schools, and Families. But just makes me wonder. I don't know. I don't think this staging of a World War III event and setting off fireworks and sirens and cordoning the kids down into the basement, that's definitely not a good thing. There's recent examples over the last several years of UFOs going a little more mainstream. This event in Riyadh, the Global Challenges and Solutions 2020 conference that occurred in Saudi Arabia in 2011, there is Bill Clinton giving the keynote address, and he even alluded to the possibility of, I don't have to tell you what the implications of that would be if it turned out to be true as far as the extraterrestrial thing. But there were several UFO researchers, Nick Pope, Jacques Vallée, and Stanton Friedman were speakers at this event. And there's some other examples, not least of which is Davos, the World Economic Forum in 2004. They had a seminar panel, The Conspiracy Behind Conspiracy Theories. Have extraterrestrials made contact with government leaders? And Dick Cheney was one of the people on the panel for that discussion. And the moderator for that was the printer of the money, De La Rue chief executive Ian Much. And more recently, economist Paul Krugman went so far as to say that we need a fake alien invasion to stimulate the economy. I kid you not. He said that on CNN, and then he went on Bill Maher and went even further with it. So I guess we're probably over time here, but thank you all, and let's talk about this.
What more can we say?
Information overload.
We probably have time for discussion and Q&A, about 15 minutes at the most till 9:30. If you'd all come up to the mic here, or there's a mic over there, because we are videotaping this, and so that we can get a good videotape of your questions. If anybody have questions, please come up to the mic.
Thank you for that. Am I live?
I hear you.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure I'm being recorded. The most disturbing image I saw was that you had a slide about MK Ultra, and there was that little child. Now,
I wish I knew the context. I don't.
I mean, is that the contraption that supposedly turned someone into a
That's
Manchurian candidate, or what was?
That is not the God helmet that Michael Persinger talks about. That, as far as I know, that particular image is probably from the 60s. I really don't know the context of that, and I freely admit that. I used it because it's such a striking image. There's a lot of more modern examples of that particular image. I mean, advertisers are using that kind of technology a lot now. It's a lot less bulky these days, but they're really trying to find out information. But no, the God helmet that Michael Persinger talks about is a lot smaller, and it mostly operates off of magnets.
It actually looks like a football helmet and has little holes drilled in it.
Yeah,
We've seen it. Well, that's not what but I thought that was supposed to be an image of something that they used in MK. Well, the God element isn't what they used in MK
No.
Ultra. See, I thought that was supposed to be something they
No,
used in MK Ultra to brainwash or hypnotize children to become assassins.
Like I
Well,
said,
that's what I saw.
yeah, well, and I deliberately used that provocative image because I knew it would get a response. Like I say, I do not know the context of that particular image. The fact is that Helms destroyed most of the documents before the church committee hearings went forward, and it's suspected that some of the worst information was destroyed, including the stuff that was done to children. But there's still a lot of information out there, like I said, with electroshock that was done, and other things.
Thank you.
Not that you abuse this, but please keep your questions brief and only one question so we can get a number of questions from a number of people. Jim, come up here.
Yeah. I don't have a question, but I have a comment on what was just discussed here. There have been indications in some quarters that the kinds of processes that were used against the children were done, they were forms of torture, and they were done to create, what's the term?
Multiple personality.
Multiple personality breakdowns in the children.
A dissociative state, yeah.
Dissociative state, right. And I just wanted to point that out. That's supposedly what they were driving at.
Yeah.
So that they could create a Manchurian candidate in one of those multiple personalities.
And there is plenty of evidence that they were, for their efforts to create a Manchurian candidate. It's just one of the most commonly talked about in the conspiracy community programs is this monarch, and nobody, to my knowledge, has yet found any documentation for that particular program. But plenty of really bad things are known to have been done. And I thought that I was going to talk about this, but Nick Redfern, who was again supposed to be our speaker, he wrote a book called Body Snatchers in the Desert, which is an alternative exploration of the Roswell crash. And the basic premise he puts forth there, as revealed to him from his contacts, was that just like we imported the Nazis with Project Paperclip, that we also imported the Japanese Mengele type experimenters that were part of what was called Unit 731, and that we brought over not just their scientists, but even, I think, some of their subjects, and continued the research here in the United States in combination with high-altitude aviation experiments using the flying wing technology that certain Nazis were supposedly developing. And while none of this is proven fact, it's a very provocative hypothesis that has deep resonance with what we know about what they did with MK Ultra. And it's funny because, Redfern didn't get any press mainstream for that book, and a lot of people just thought, there you go with some crazy idea. But more recently, Annie Jacobson came out with her book, Area 51, and of course she's a mainstream journalist. She got all the press, and her history of Area 51 has this one particular story in it that got all the press, and guess what? It's a variation of exactly what he was suggesting, only in this case, it wasn't, it was the Russians who created the incident. But what they gloss over is what her contact said was that, well, we continued that research. It's the same story. So it's like it may be a different variant for how the alleged crash and occupants got there, but I think Redfern's hypothesis rather the information he puts forth has merit, because we know from all the MK Ultra evidence that they were taking the dispossessed, the forgotten children and the orphans. They were literally body snatching kids from orphanages and putting them into these experiments. And this is stuff that we do have documentation on.
Very disturbing.
Jim,
You can go right there.
Where? Oh, here? Oh, good. Thank you.
Here, let's turn it around so you can face the
and look at Miles.
Thank you very much, Miles. That was an overload of information, but very accurate in many places. But keep in mind, folks, there's a lot of misinformation mixed in with all this stuff to confuse you. I will guarantee it's genuine that they can put sound and light and feeling and touch, all these kind of things, into the human body, into the human mind, without using any kind of obvious situation. All can be done electronically. I personally have experienced the induction of sound into the mind, a beautiful symphony during an inventors fair in Washington, D.C. with Patrick Flanagan's neurophone, that in this case it had the electrodes on the head. Normally, if you have the field strong enough, you don't need the electrodes on the head. You can put them in a speaker behind, say, a chair or something, and the sound will appear in your head as though it was coming from all around you. And in this case, this was a piece that I knew, a classic piece, and it came in like you hear on an old-time phonograph, kind of tinny. And then as you listen, the sound spreads out to bring in all the lower frequency sound. Very interesting, but they're strictly, experimental, or should say, experiential. And that was an interesting thing. The light was a flickering light in the back of the head, like a fluorescent, and you turn your head, and of course it goes along with the head. This was in about 1995 or so. I've collected data on this phenomenon ever since it came out. Around Earth, there's certain places where sound is induced into the brain during storms and certain earthquake phenomena. You get the light during the earthquake phenomena. That's one of the big indicators of an earthquake coming in. But the situation now, I can't find any information since 2000 on any of these stimulation things of light and sound and touch on the human body. Persinger has investigated this quite a bit. And I think his research on the earth effects, natural earth effects, inducing strange phenomena in people's minds in certain areas, having more of an indication, more of a tendency to induce hallucinations of various types, weird phenomena that people have, making it easier for psychic phenomena. Perhaps Stonehenge with the blue stones was that kind of a thing, that this particular type of crystal was required to make it easier for the person in charge to bring about a particular phenomena. So I thank you very much for this, folks, but a lot of this stuff you need to look at and say, oh, that's interesting, and not get a belief system or a judgment formed. You brought a lot of information in here, and I really appreciate it, because I'm quite familiar with most of the people, even met many people you're talking about here, especially Bearden. That was an interesting one. And what's that, Excalibur briefing? That's a good one to read. But all this stuff in the front, in my opinion, is fiction. The back part is what's good. He was a nuclear engineer. And he put out something called Quantum-Perceptron Theory on the meaning of being and existence. It came out, as I recall, with a bright orange cover with a SAM-D missile taken off on the cover. He was very interesting. Lots of stories in this area, and thanks so much for what you're doing.
He mentions the neurophone, and Flanagan, he often talked about how he felt like the military had squashed his stuff and used it for their own purposes. But what it reminds me of, and y'all may have seen the news articles just a few months ago, and they're using that same technology now, again, to advertise to you.
Yes.
They're using it on the windows in trains. So if you rest your head against the window to go to sleep, you're going to start hearing an advertisement in your head.
You're kidding.
Nope. It's the same exact technology, only used
I wanted to mention something about it.
for advertising.
I have a comment here on NPR radio tonight in reference to your biological cybernetics. They are now selling refurbished pacemakers. So, of course, you have to go to China. But you got to go to China or Mexico to get one. But then somebody said, "Well, who would use one of those?" But if you had a choice between not having any or a refurbished one, I guess you pick a refurbished one.
Just make sure that it doesn't get hacked by.
Thank you, Miles.
But I don't know if it's Obamacare or not. I don't know.
The focal sound thing that they show you, those little black squares, that's just one small aspect. You don't need it when you can feed the sound in remotely, non-contact, It's focused in, yeah, but you don't see it or feel it. One thing about the Patrick Flanagan thing is very interesting, looking at how the government likes to control things. He had this neurophone out for a number of years, and he liberally shared the circuit diagram on it with anybody that wanted one. Kind of like Beck would share the situation on brainwave monitoring, stuff like that. It was interesting here. Then the government come to him and said, you got to put all this in secrecy, because this is not allowed. He said,
Terrorists might use it.
Take it and shove it, because this has been out now for over 15 years, and I put out the circuit diagram. Anybody can copy this. You can't do this to me, because it's already out. And so they did restrict him to this idea of putting the electrodes on the forehead or temples to put the information in. And he sold those around quite a bit during the past 30 or 40 years. So there you go.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I would like to
Well, I've got one.
Okay.
Miles, I speak from my Earth Mother persona. You didn't mention John Mack, but you did make allusion to the fact that there seems to be a patterning of the people who are abducted, that the Earth is in danger and there may be some collective unconscious that's speaking for Gaia. And that people, it's been known in shamanic tradition that people were taken to certain electromagnetic sites with ley lines to have vision quests to get in touch with their higher wisdom or a wisdom guide or whatever. What is your take on to what degree Gaia is warning us that we are putting our home planet in danger? I'd like to hear you give your opinion on that.
Well, that basically is the feeling that I've had about it. That if there is a global consciousness that's developed, in fact I wrote a letter expressing this to Jacques Vallée. Never heard back, but I did get to meet him later. But I put forth the idea. Well, it seems like if there is a planetary organism, what its main purpose is to evolve life, and that ultimately it will be bound for outside the planet, and so perhaps it's preparing us for that inevitable experience by having us go through kind of training, that going through these simulations, and I do think that that could very likely be the reason for that ecological message in the contact and abduction experiences. Of course, there's evidence in government documents that the United States government was very concerned about the possible spread of communism and that the contactee message was preaching, a more socialist government model and the idea of ceasing nuclear testing, and they thought that this was must be some kind of Soviet plot. But I think you could also look at it from the perspective of a consciousness of a planet that's trying to redirect our energies. And I do think that perhaps we maybe already saw that. One of the things that you don't really hear is that there's been a significant decrease in the number of abduction reports since September 11th. And, there's any number of possible rational reasons for this. That doesn't mean that there has been less contact. It could just be that people who are having these experiences no longer feel compelled for other reasons to report them as much as they did before. But as I kind of started to allude to, I think there's kind of been a sea change in our collective consciousness, and I don't think there'd be any argument there with regards to post 9/11 reality. But I wonder if the critical mass was reached, that perhaps that 1, 2, 3, 5% of the population was touched by this phenomenon, and that the sea change at a deep level has already been affected. That doesn't mean that we've actually slowed our degradation of the biosphere as a result, but I think that the consciousness about it perhaps is further along. But that's obviously
So you
pure
think
speculation.
the thing between the climate deniers and the petroleum industry, the petroleum wars and the military-industrial complex, that it's actually now taking that form? It's shifted from 9/11 to because a consciousness was raised about the endangerment of the planet. We actually faced, we were looking at World War III, so to speak.
Well, that was, the message of the alien intelligences certainly went through some distinct phases. First being cease the nuclear weapons testing. Then a more ecological message, and then more of a spiritual growth message. But and I'd say that those themes are still there. But Strieber particularly popularized the widespread experience among abductees of seeing visions of the destruction of the earth. And of course, some people think that this was their way of getting an emotional response so that they could eat our emotions. Others think that, no, this was a legitimate attempt to try to scare us back onto the right path. And, I don't profess to know what the hell's going on, honestly.
Thank you, Miles,
Thanks for
your
your
expose on a deep and difficult topic.
Amazing. Wonderful.
Thank you.